Hello, welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and in this video we'll be exploring St. Peter's, Alstonefield, which is one of the oldest and best, in my opinion, churches in the Staffordshire Moorlands. Now, in many of these videos, we've seen churches where the Victorians have basically gutted the building, everything's been taken out, and we've just got bare stone walls and some Victorian benches and other furniture. This is a church where the Victorian hand was relatively light. The chancel indeed has been very much altered in terms of its fittings and such like, and of course there's an organ in there, but the nave is almost as it would have been in the 17th century. Behind me you can see the oldest part of the church. This is the east wall of the nave with its Norman chancel arch. The church was established in the 12th century, or the current building was built in the 12th century. I say current building, the earliest parts of the current building were built in the 12th century by the monks of Combermere Abbey. They were given the parish at that time. And all that's left of their building is this chancel arch. Everything else has been replaced in the 14th century, and in the 15th century a new north aisle was built. So let's have a look around and see furnishings and a little bit of the history of this building. The Reformation brought about a great change in how English church buildings appeared. Before the Reformation, seating would have been in open benches where there was fixed seating. In many churches, people would bring their own stools, or there would just be a few benches and then, again, stools. After the Reformation, the box pew comes in. The oldest of them are 16th century. Alstonefield's a particularly fine set of 17th century box pews. You can see them here, the carved doors. And the box pew, each pew would be rented or even owned by a family, and that would be their pew. Now, of course, today in churches people have a feeling, well, where I normally sit is my seat. Well, in the 17th century through into the 19th century, that would literally be the case in most churches for most people. Unless you were too poor to afford your own pew, you would have a family box pew. They vary in size, and of course rent also varied depending on how big your pew was, and the size of your pew had something to do with your social standing. We'll see that as we go around. You'll see the pulpit there, that's a 17th century 30-decker. It's now a two-decker. The lower deck, the clerk's desk, has been removed and turned into a lectern, which is no longer by the chancel arch, no longer by the pulpit. We'll see it as we go around. So let's have a look around. First of all, we notice the aisles. The arcades are 14th century, although the north aisle, and that's where the main door is, you can see that internal porch there, that aisle was rebuilt in the 15th century. You will also notice that the south aisle leans outward at quite a notable angle. It is quite safe. It's just that these medieval churches, sometimes the foundations were not as secure as they thought, and the building kind of settled with a lean outwards. You can also see there a step under the clerestory, which is going to be where the clerestory has been added above the 14th century wall. That's just against the east wall there. So, wonderful set of box pews. It's always good to see them in place. The Victorians just sort of rip them out, and very often either threw them away or they use the carved bits for decoration. This is the lectern. This is made of bits of the clerk's desk. Vestry private. Quite common to see these box-style vestries. You'll see the curtained area, and that allows the minister to look out and see what's going on. We have a later, looks like a Georgian pew here that has some bits of the older pew. The high back is because you've got a door here, and you don't want a draft down the back of your neck every time the door opens. Here we have some of the seating for the poor people. Open benches. If you couldn't afford a pew, you got one of these. There's the bier, where, well, with the bier your coffin would be carried off, and on top of it is a nice old oil lamp. This pew is now the children's area, which is quite nice. And along here we have one of the bigger box pews. It's a nice, you can see how big it is, really. It's now the quiet area for quiet prayer and meditation. And it's much bigger than the ordinary box pews over here. And that indicates that this belonged to one of the important families in the parish, and they would have used it. It may have been the vicar's pew, in fact. Yes, it was a vicarage here. We've got another one of the larger box pews over here. Here, some Victorian pews, Victorian seating, and this very nice local sandstone. Of course, all the stone here is quarried locally, and you've got some rather nice pinkish stone. There's that pulpit. Now, in the 17th century, there was a Puritan ministry here. The last of those ministers was a Mr. Farmer who conformed in 1662. He remained in the Church of England. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he surrendered his principles. There were people like William Gurnall of Lavenham who conformed, who reckoned that they would stay in the Church of England rather than going out. And that was the case with Mr. Farmer here. But there was a Puritan ministry, and this is a Puritan pulpit. You can imagine the old Puritan with his long black gown and his white bands and a little black skull cap, preaching from that high pulpit. Of course, it's your usual three-decker. You'd have a clerk's desk at the bottom, which is gone, and then the reading desk and the pulpit proper. You've got that very nice Norman chancel arch from the folk at Combermere. Nice scalloped capitals. It's not a very fancy Norman arch, but it is a good example. Looking along here, there we have, see these 15th century windows in the north aisle, and there at the back there's a ringer's gallery up in the tower. The ringer's gallery has a number of functions, one of which is it keeps the bell ropes up and away from people, and it creates a space in the tower below, and the other is, of course, that the ringers can then stay up there during part of the service if necessary, and they can look down and see what's going on. That pulpit, again, we'll come back to that, to just go up into the chancel now. This has been largely Victorianised, but it's not a high Victorian setup. It's very much just your standard Victorian chancel. We've still got this is a 13th century part of the building, and now here is Mr. Farmer, Roger Farmer. I mean, I said William, it should be Roger. William Farmer was one of our ministers at Bethel back in the day, but Roger Farmer of Emmanuel College, Cambridge, AM. And he died in 1682, so 20 years after St. Bartholomew's. Died at a good age. And the fact he's from Emmanuel College, that was the premier Puritan college. And there's the back end of that pulpit, his pulpit indeed, although it would have been used first by one of his predecessors. Organ, Victorian, there's no markings on it. The markings will be, of course, inside, well, or over the keyboard, and the keyboard is locked, which is fair enough. Nice, very nice, actually, communion rails with the nice closely packed balusters to keep the dogs out. And here we have William Henry Purchas was the and you will notice what it says about William Henry Purchas. This tablet is erected by his parishioners and friends. He died in 1903 to commemorate his faithful evangelical ministry. evangelical ministry. And this explains the restoration being the way it is, because he's the man who did the restoration. He was vicar here between 1817 and 1903. And he's the man who does the restoration. And he's an evangelical. And that's why you don't have the normal Oxford movement style restoration, because Mr. Purchas will have nothing to do with the Oxford movement. I'm quite right too. We have a plain table, and it would be a table because Mr. Purchas was an evangelical. There's his desk here in the chancel, and this is the memorial to his wife, who died in 1884, aged 60. So that explains a great deal. An evangelical ministry means, yes, of course, he's followed the typical Victorian fashion, choir stalls up here in the chancel, but he has kept the box pews and kept the three-decker, and we are grateful for the evangelical ministry for that and other reasons. So you've got Puritans in the 17th century, evangelical in the 19th century. What a blessed parish this was, where the gospel was faithfully proclaimed. Now here we have the date on the pulpit. Very often this is where you go looking for such inscriptions. Robert Bostorn, Thomas Weston, Roger Yate, 1637. And they were the church wardens. They're the people who paid, of course, the furnishings. We've got this wonderful rich carving on the pulpit. And you have the cup there with the things springing out of them, and this speaks of the cup of life. It's always important to remember that inscriptions and carvings and symbols have their own meaning based on who's doing them. At the top we have it is required in stewards that they be found faithful, 1 Corinthians 4 verse etc. And then be faithful, and I will give the crown, which is not, of course, from the authorized version, but the Geneva, which is interesting. Again, Puritans. And here we have, this is the family pew of the Big House family. And you can see here, this is about the same date as everything else, it's the same kind of carving, and it's the Cotton family. Charles Cotton, who paid actually for this pew, obviously, and for other bits of restoration, was a friend of Isaac Walton, and he himself has these Puritan tendencies. But of course, being the Big House family, they have to have their own big pew, and of course it's the fanciest pew of the lot. We have here the later 19th century, is 19th century, yes. Oh no, this is the early 20th century one. This replaces, of course, the one that's in the other aisle. And this has an inscription, "To the glory of God, in memory of William Adams of Church Farm, Alstonefield, who entered into rest May the 30th, 1928. This be presented to the parish by his wife." And it's much more sophisticated. It's got wheels and suspension and such like. And here again we have some open pews and back. And we've got here, of course, this is a church history frieze, which gives some indication of the history of the church and how things developed over time. We have the Lord's Prayer and the Creed, which were required to be displayed in all Anglican churches. And then at the back we have a big 19th century font. One assumes that Mr. Purchas felt that the old font no longer did duty. It may have been something that just wouldn't work for 19th century people, so got a big new font there. Stone coffin covered up, and there's some more old carving here, and obviously part of that is the bowl of the old font. And here in the wall, a piece of an Anglo-Saxon cross. So that's the inside here at Alstonefield. Well, I'm going to stop here and do a separate video on the outside of the building, which is very interesting. So thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you. I'll just in fact say a few words to camera after, just to close. And so there we are, the interior here at Alstonefield, in this marvellous pulpit. And here we have a church that tells us about an evangelical ministry that has been sustained, that was sustained for centuries, from the Puritans right through into the 20th century. I wish I could say about the ministry here today, I don't know, but it is a marvellous witness to faith and a reminder that what you believe affects what your building looks like. Well, again, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you in his grace.